Is at the open house put on by the Premier in Ancaster, and I anticipate Member Bama will be here shortly. Does anyone have any additions to the agenda? See none, I refer you to 9G or C, 8C. It will be deferred. And I also refer you to 11D. It will be deferred. 11D will be deferred, and 8C is being deferred. I'll announce that members of the audience, if you need any information concerning this meeting this evening, there's a sign-up sheet just inside the door on the right. Put your name and address there, and you'll be contacted with information from tonight's meeting. If anyone has a pecuniary interest, please do so at the appropriate time. There are no delegations or petitions presentations listed, so we'll move to minutes of the previous meeting. Seeking approval. Member Pierce. Yes. Yes, I've called it and it's been approved. Moving on to the minutes of the previous meeting. Seeking approval of those minutes. Moved by Member Pierce, second by Member Coleman. Questions? No one? All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Does anyone have any business arising from those minutes? Seeing none, we'll move on to 7, public hearings under the Planning Act to receive information. There are none listed. We'll move on to public hearings under the Planning Act to consider staff recommendations, and there are a number. And the first one is 8A. Mr. Grover, 116 King Street A, SBA 1-18-JK, and I'll ask our planner to present.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Committee. The subject lands are located at 116 King Street in the geographic township of Burford. The applicant is requesting an amendment from Sign Bylaw 121-08 to allow for an LED video sign to be installed within a portion of an existing ground sign on the property for the purpose of advertising the proposed uses on the property. The sign is proposed to be a maximum of 1.2 meters squared in area per sign face, being double-sided, operating from 6 a.m. until 10 p.m. and will not shake, flash, and/or scroll. Currently, the sign bylaw prohibits video TV signs within any zone and does not include requirements for provisions for LED signs. The lands are designated core area within the County of Brant official plan and zoned built and cultural heritage area core area commercial within the County of Brant zoning bylaw. Comments received from internal departments concerning this application have been attached for your review and consideration. Staff recommends approval of this application subject to the conditions outlined within the report. This concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Any member of committee have any questions of our planner? Seeing none, I'll ask if the applicant or a representative of the applicant is here and would like to present. Seeing no one, I'll ask the audience, is there any member of the audience who would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a second time, is there any member of the audience who would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a third and final time, is there any member of the audience who would like to speak to this application? Seeing no one, I'll ask committee how they'd like to deal with it. Member Coleman? So moved. Member Miller seconds. Any questions or concerns? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. This recommendation will go forward to council 3 weeks from this evening for final approval. Moving on to the next application, housekeeping amendment to the County of Brant sign bylaw, 121-08-SBA 2-18-JK, and I'll ask our planner to present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Committee. Planning staff has undertaken a housekeeping amendment with regard to the County of Brant sign bylaw 121-08. This amendment has been brought forward in an attempt to save future applicants which have chosen to participate in the CIP process additional time and fees which may be associated with relief requests for proposals. This amendment proposes to incorporate a clause within the general provisions of the sign bylaw, which would allow for exemption from the requirements for proposed signs which are proceeding through the Community Improvement Plan CIP process. This process receives council consideration, and therefore any subsequent applications to request amendments for proposals may be redundant and time-consuming for applicants. Staff is requesting approval of this application and proposed amendments outlined within the report. This concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Any member of committee with a question of our planner? Seeing no one? Is there any member of the audience who would like to speak to this bylaw? I'll ask a second time. Is there any member of the audience who would like to speak to this bylaw? I'll ask a third and final time. Is there any member of the audience who would like to speak to this bylaw? Seeing no one, how would committee wish to deal with it? Member Pierce?
So moved.
Seeking a seconder. Second by Member Carty. Questions or concerns? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? It is carried. And it will go to council 3 weeks from this evening for final approval. Item C, Shirecrest Homes has been deferred, so we'll move to D. Kyle Whiting, 138 Jenkins Road, ZBA 1-18-DN. And we're going to change planners, and Dan's coming forward. Whenever you're ready, Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The rezoning application for the property located at 138 Jenkins Road in the Brant Mill and Jenkins Road settlement area was presented to the Planning Advisory Committee on February 6th for information purposes. This evening, staff will be recommending approval of the application. The subject lands are designated hamlets and villages in the County of Brant official plan. The current zoning on the subject lands is agricultural. The application proposes to change the zoning on the subject lands from agricultural to residential hamlets and villages to facilitate the creation of 2 new residential lots. The subject lands have a total area of 3 acres, a frontage along Jenkins Road of 95 meters, and 132 meters along Brant Mill Road. The lots are proposed to be created through a subsequent consent application to be heard at the Committee of Adjustment on a later date. 2 letters were received as part of the public notice circulation and have been included in the agenda package for your review. The key items that will be reviewed as part of the consent application include safe entrances, water supply, review of overall lot drainage and grading for the proposed dwelling. In conclusion, planning staff are supportive of the request to permit the rezoning of the subject lands to facilitate the creation of 2 new residential lots. The development as proposed is considered to be consistent with the provincial policies and official plan. It is being recommended that this application be approved. Thank you.
Thank you. Any member of committee with a question of our planner? Member Gatward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the planner. Can you tell me how many meters it is from these proposed new lots to the Brant Flour Mill?
Through you, Mr. Chair, from the closest lot being in the north portion, I'll just go back. So the flour mill is located in the north portion of the settlement area. It's about, I believe it was in the report, about 250 meters to the flour mill from the closest residential lot that is proposed to be created.
Any other member of committee with a question of the planner? Member Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question of clarification through you to Dan. The residential hamlets and villages, is there a minimum size for those lots, or does it depend if it's on a services, like whether it's septic or is it always the same? The reason I'm asking is because we've got 2 other ones, one where there's a rural residential, and the minimum size lot's 4,000 square meters. Then we also have suburban residential where it's 3,000 meters. Can you just, but this one is, I'm not sure where this one would fall, residential hamlet and village.
So through you, Mr. Chair, the residential hamlets and villages in the zoning bylaw requires a minimum of 30 meters of frontage and 3,000 square meters of
Okay.
area. The rural residential is 40 meters of frontage and 4,000 square meters, and then suburban residential is where you get into partial services and non-service lots. So the partial service would require 20 meters of frontage and 1,000 square meters of area, and the non-serviced lots in suburban residential area is 30 meters of frontage and 3,000 square meters of area.
So just to follow up, so even though residential hamlet or village could be serviced, it still has to be at least 3,000 square meters.
That's correct.
Is that correct? Okay.
Anyone else with a question of our planner? Seeing none, is the Member Coleman, I'm sorry.
The retained lot, was that subject to a servitude?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the retained lot can be developed today. The subject lands are vacant, so the applicant is able to build on that, what's shown as the retained parcel today, and I believe they have pursued a building permit. So what we're doing is creating two more lots from that. Yeah.
But the retained lot that's already there
Yep.
is part of the severance, one thing.
The retained lot as shown has not been created today.
I understand that, but it was created sometime. Because it'd be coming off the agricultural land in the back, so it's not be.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the subject lands were most likely created as a result of the severance.
Member Gatward?
Just in an effort to assist, this parcel's been long-standing, and there was a home on the retained parcel, which burned down. And that's why there's already a building permit for that first corner lot. But it's been like that for many, many, many years, and it wasn't farmed.
Any other member of committee with a question of our planner? Seeing no one, is the applicant or representative of the applicant here? Please come forward, state your name and address.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Bob Phillips from J.H. Cahoon Engineering Limited. This application was before you a month ago and was presented by Mr. Van Porten of our office, and I'm just trying to pitch hit for him while he's away. This application is following through on an anticipated severance of the lands into 3 parcels. As was mentioned, the existing house burned down 2 or 3 years ago. They've got a building permit to rebuild that particular house, but just haven't started yet. This application, the planning staff did a great job in presenting the application. I'm not sure I can add much more other than the GRCA has supported this application. Archaeological work's been done on the property with no fines. Other than that, I'd just be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any member of committee with a question of the applicant? Seeing no one? Thank you.
Thank you.
Stand close. There may be questions arise from the audience. Any member of the audience like to speak to this application? Please come forward, state your name and address.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. My name is Steve Scrutton. My address is 6 Brant Mill Road. In fact, I'm adjacent to the property in question. My property lies just to the left of the property shown on the overhead there. I want to state that I do not oppose this development. What I do want to make sure is that the water supply is sufficient for my place as well as the new properties, and that my water supply will not be contaminated by any of the septic beds. And I actually brought with me, which I'll submit to the committee, some copies, thank you, some pictures of my property showing the well. It's in a low site. It was taken recently after the heavy rains, and basically the well is sitting in a small lake. That's the well is in a low area, and it fills up with water. And my well is just to the left of what's shown there. In fact, it is not that far from the septic bed of the leftmost property as planned. It may be within code. I don't know a code distance. I don't know what the code distance is, but I don't know if the code would take into account what we're looking at there, the amount of water in that low site that we get when there's heavy rains. So what I would like to request or suggest is that as this planning is considered, perhaps the leftmost house, the septic bed could be placed at the back of the house instead of the front of the house, because it would be considerably further away from my well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other member of the audience would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a second time. Any member of the audience would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a third and final time. Any member of the audience would like to speak to this application? Mr. Phillips, would you like to respond to the residents' concerns?
Just quickly, Mr. Chairman, with respect to the location of the well, there are requirements under the Ontario Building Code that specify distances from the wells. That'll be taken into account in the design of the grading. Obviously, I haven't seen the pictures, but if there's ponding around as well, I think there, maybe when we're doing some drainage work out there, maybe we can look at that and see if there's a solution for them, whether it means some fill or just some grading on the lot, but we'll certainly look at part of that. These will all be conditions of the Committee of Adjustment that have to do with water and drainage and grading. So we would expect those conditions to come through that process. I hope that answers the questions.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
How would the committee wish to deal with this application? Member Carty? Moved by Member Carty, second by Member Coleman. Any other questions or concerns? Seeing none, call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? It is carried. This report will go forward to Council 3 weeks from this evening for final approval. And Mr. Bauma will now join us at the table. Moving on to E, Mr. Dumanol, 241 McGill Road, ZBA 2-18-DN, and I'll ask our planner to present. Dan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The rezoning application for the property located at 241 was also presented to the Planning Advisory Committee a month ago for information, and we'll be looking for an approval on the application today. The subject lands are located in the Mount Pleasant settlement area and are designated suburban residential in the County of Brant official plan. The subject lands are currently zoned agricultural, a portion suburban residential, and a small portion to the north natural heritage. The application is proposing kind of 3 steps as originally proposed. The first is that the agricultural area be rezoned to suburban residential to permit residential development, and that's about 3.7 acres to be changed, 2.5 acres. And the second portion is that the roughly 3.7 acres be rezoned from agricultural to natural heritage to recognize the extent of an existing wetland feature. So that's the area highlighted by the number 2 there. And 3 is that the approximately 0.5 hectares be rezoned from suburban residential to special exemption suburban residential to permit an undersized lot with a minimum area of 1,950 square meters, whereas 3,000 square meters is required. The severance is proposed as part of a subsequent consent application to be heard at the Committee of Adjustment at a later date. The request for a reduction in the lot size is due to the physical restrictions that are generated by a grade change to the north and limits of the wetland boundary. GRC has reviewed the environmental impacts study that has been submitted, and they're satisfied with the proposed rezoning to protect the wetland feature. Once again, key items that will be reviewed as part of the consent application involve entrances, water, drainage, and grading of the property. In conclusion, the planning staff are supportive of the request to permit the rezoning of the subject lands to facilitate the protection of the wetland feature and creation of a new residential lot. The development as proposed is considered to be consistent with the provincial policy statement and official plan. It's being recommended that the application be approved. Thank you.
Any member of committee with a question of our planner? Seeing none, is the applicant or a representative of the applicant here would like to speak to this application? Mr. Phillips.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure I can add much to the planner's presentation. Again, this will follow through the Committee of Adjustment for approval. If there's any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any member of committee with a question of the applicant? Seeing no one? Thank you. Hang close. There might be a question from the audience. Any member of the audience would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a second time. Is there any member of the audience who would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a third and final time. Is there any member in the audience who would like to speak to this application? Seeing no one, how would committee wish to deal with this application? Member Simons? Seeking a seconder, seconded by Member Pierce. Any questions or concerns? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? This carried. This application will go forward to council 3 weeks from this evening for final approval. Moving on to F, Paul Halleck, 63 St. George Road, ZBA 3-18-DN, and I'll ask our planner to present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A rezoning application for the property located at 63 St. George Road has been received. Planning staff are looking to recommend approval of the application, and we'll be looking for a decision on the application this evening. Ultimately, the applicant is proposing to sever the actively farmed portion of 63 St. George Road from the residential portion of the property. The consent is necessary for the purposes of formalizing the terms of a legal estate. The land will be transferred to Mr. Labiris. Labiris? Pretty close. The subject lands are designated in designated agriculture in the County Brant official plan. The current zoning on the subject land is a site-specific, an A-12 agricultural, which permits a horse riding facility in addition to other uses in the agricultural zone. The horse riding facility was located in the south. You can kind of see the track there. It hasn't been in operation for over 10 years. So in order to facilitate the consent application, the applicant is required to rezone the residential portion of the property from special provision agricultural A-12 to a special provision agricultural to permit an undersized parcel, agricultural parcel with a frontage of 83 meters and an area of 7.8 hectares, or acres, approximately 3 hectares. And the applicant is also required to rezone the active agricultural portion of the subject lands from that special provision A-12 to a modified special provision to permit an undersized agricultural parcel with a frontage of 130 meters, an area of 14.5 hectares, and to prohibit the construction of a future dwelling to ensure that no new building lots are created. Based on the information provided, staff have interpreted the request to have legal and technical merit. Staff have taken the appropriate steps to ensure that a new residential building lot is not being created through the approval of this application and subsequent consent applications to maintain consistency with the provincial policy statement. In conclusion, planning staff are supportive of the technical request to sever the actively farmed portion from 63 St. George from the residential portion of the property. Measures have been put in place that the intent of provincial and official plans, provincial policy and official plan policies be met. It is being recommended that the application be approved. Thank you.
Any member of committee with a question of our planner? Seeing none, is the applicant or a representative of the applicant here would like to present? He's just coming through the door. Mr. Halleck, we're dealing with your application right now. If you'd like to speak to it, I ask you to come forward.
Okay, thank you. Where would I speak?
Right there. Please state your name and address.
Paul Halleck, 63 St. George Road, and I'll let you, did you read your report? Yes,
The
okay.
planner has presented, and he recommended approval.
And then I have no comments then, that's good. I'll answer any questions if anybody has any.
Stay handy, Paul, Mr. Halleck, there might be a question from the audience. Any member of the audience like to speak to this application? I'll ask a second time, is there any member in the audience who would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a third and final time, is there any member of the audience who would like to speak to this application? Seeing no one, I'll ask committee how they wish to deal with it. Member Coleman? Seconded by Member Cardy. Any questions or concerns? Call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. This application will go forward to council 3 weeks from this evening for final approval.
Thank you.
We're going to change planners, and I'll draw your attention. This is the application concerning the official plan amendment in the St. George area. I noticed some familiar faces out there. Rajika is going to present, and this is the St. George official plan amendment that we're going to be talking about now. And whenever you're ready, Rajika, we're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. In November last year, WSP, on behalf of county and staff, we prepared a report for St. George area study addendum along with an official plan amendment that was presented. Since then, there were a number of comments that were received, and we have done minor refinements to the OPA as well as the St. George area study. The reports are presented tonight with a recommendation for approval. There are a few things that GRCA provided some comments, and based on that, Schedule C and C2, they have been revised, and that has been attached to the addendum. The OPA is, it's critical at this time. We're bringing it forward now so that this will set a policy framework for the upcoming Ontario Municipal Board hearing for Empire, which starts April 11th. Staff is recommending that the area study addendum be adopted and the OPA be approved. There are additional details that can be presented by Greg Bender, who's here from WSP Group, and he can provide additional details. That concludes my comments. Thanks.
Any member of committee with a question of our planner? Member Ed.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I believe, Mayor Addy, you're referring to the additional comments, Schedule C and C2, that are on the addendum. That is a part of the addendum package. It's the same package.
They're in your addendum, sir. Well, Member Addy is looking for that. Member Gatward, do you have a question?
Yes, I do have a question. Thank you. I received the addendum this afternoon, and I read the letter from Davies Howe, Land Development Advocacy and Litigation, and they are talking about their client's property being down designated. I didn't think we did that.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I can address that. The property, which is Oaks of St. George, is a golf course. It is designated as Parks and Recreational in our official plan. Through this official plan amendment, we are not down designating the lands. The property will, however, be in a secondary settlement boundary, which will allow the property to develop on private services once they go through an official plan amendment, a zoning bylaw amendment, and complete all the studies that are required. This information has been discussed with Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and they are, we have discussed the same scenario with them. The representative of Oaks of St. George did send a letter in after the November planning meeting, so that's where the discussion started with the ministry to understand better that they would have to go through an OPA if they want to develop the property. We are not down designating or changing land uses in the St. George, through this report.
Okay, and just as a follow-up, Beacon Environmental, which they hired, had suggested that perhaps an MTE, through their technical memorandum, that we, as a county, should consider discharging to the Grand River, and that would give us more servicing capacity for all the growth in St. George. When staff looked at that, it wasn't the chosen option. Is it because of the expense, or?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the Class EA is still ongoing. It has not been finalized yet. But without knowing the technical details of the exact reasons of why, is it because of expense or timing, it could be kind of like a phase 1, twin the plant, and phase 2, pipe to Grand River. It could be if council wishes to do that way, but those options will be presented once the Class EA process is complete. At this time, based on the area study that was adopted by council in 2014, as well as this OPA is to implement the area study recommendations. The area study did there were some technical analysis that was done to make these recommendations of primary versus secondary settlement boundary, as well as that the Fairchild's Creek has the limited capacity to receive the discharge, and that's why it is presented this way.
Thank you.
Member Eddy, did you want to complete your question? Did you find it in your addendum, the answers to your question?
Thank you very much. Does this application or amendment include the change from developing the western part of the proposed area from urban services to individual services?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, if I am understanding correctly, and I apologize, I believe that what you're asking is that the west side of St. George, it will be on partial services. So municipal water is envisioned for those lands and private septic systems.
So the answer to my question is yes. Is that correct? It does include the change.
Yes.
From urban services. Yeah. Has that been presented to the residents of the area at a public meeting or to give them the opportunity to comment?
There were a number of meetings that had happened through the area study process as well, and the area study recommended this change in 2014. There were 2 public meetings that have happened since 2014. There was one in 2016 and November of last year to present this information.
Thank you. Thank you.
Member Bama, you had your hand.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. 2 questions. Number one, in the current plan, is the Oaks of St. George a primary settlement in the urban settlement?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, yes, it is.
So when the allegation is made that we are down designating that to a secondary urban settlement area, then are we going from primary urban to secondary urban?
That's the only change that we are making, is going from primary urban settlement to a secondary urban settlement because St. George can't be fully serviced.
So could that be interpreted by a law firm as down designating?
I believe the representative from the law firm is here to clarify what down designating means to them, but from my perspective, I believe we are not down designating.
Okay, thank you. And then the second question, if I may, through you, Mr. Chair, is with the numbers that we're seeing coming available, we're phasing that, which is good, all the construction and everything. Will there be enough capacity to do all of that proposed development? Because what good does it do to phase things if we'll never have the capacity to do a phase 4 or a phase 3? Do we know that?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we did do an analysis of the development proposals that have been submitted, or staff had pre-consultation on various parcels as well. So based on those numbers, the phasing plan was presented. As it sits today, with the densities that have been proposed in St. George, phases 3 and 4 cannot be serviced. That has been stated in the report, as well as there is a policy that we have included stating that unless the densities are reduced a bit to accommodate phases 3 and 4, or alternate solutions, for example, pipe to Grand River, or something is proposed. It is my understanding that the landowners are discussing the unit allocation and are working out some sort of agreement.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Any questions? Member Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to Rashika. Just a couple of real quick questions here. At this moment, we don't have a servicing allocation policy until after the Class E8 comes out, is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that's correct. The allocation policy will start working on it after the Class E is completed.
Will we see that or at this committee? Okay.
That's, yes.
Next question is the reserve capacity. Have you have we set a target of 5 or 10%, or again, will that wait until the Class E8 comes out?
We have in our official plan amendment, draft OPA, we have set a policy basically stating 5 to 10% should be for infilling, but when the actual allocation policy is framed, that's when we'll include that as well. When we did the numbers, the analysis on the number of units that have been proposed so far, as I was just explaining earlier, we did take out that 5 to 10% of the total number of units, and that was the result that phases 3 and 4 could not be developed after we reserved 5 to 10% for the infilling.
Okay, thank you. And the last question is just about propane. The one business is, I think it's classified as an M3. How close can development be to an M3, or does it depend on fencing or gate, I don't know, like berms or whatnot?
The industrial boulevard is right beside, I mean, if you, it's right beside the residential area. So when any residential development comes in accordance with the MOE-CC guidelines, the development proposal has to comply with D6 guidelines. Basically, that is the land use compatibility, the distance between land use industrial facility, to the residential or more sensitive land uses. So the proposals must comply with those land use compatibility guidelines, and we ask that information at the time of application submission as well. With respect to the propane facility, the TSSA has a different set of guidelines, and our policy, our OPA, only specifically, in accordance with Planning Act, only talks about that we need to circulate to the propane facility owners in compliance with what the Planning Act regulations are. So that's what we are basically proposing.
Okay, thank you.
Member Cardy?
Rashika, just to add to Councillor Miller's concern there, propane TSSA we were talking about, you were saying they have particular guidelines that that has to be followed as well? In other words, I guess what we're saying is you can't build close to a propane facility because of the potential of an incident. Not saying there ever would be, but because of the potential. Are there government guidelines on that?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, yes, there are guidelines. There are, of course, TSSA guidelines that will regulate that. In addition to that, it is my understanding that it is the propane operator has to upgrade their risk management plans if sensitive land uses are proposed around it. This is one of the pending issues with Empire Ontario Municipal Board hearing as well, and we'll wait and see what decision comes out of that.
Thank you.
Any other member of committee with a question of our planner? Seeing none, I'll open this portion up to, is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak to this application? Please come forward, state your name and address.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Michael Melling, and I'm a lawyer with Davies Howe in Toronto, and my partner, Megan McDermott, wrote to you, and it's become apparent to me in listening so far, you've already read her letter and paid close attention to what it says, so I'm going to try not to duplicate what's in it. Our law firm acts for Strema Developments, Inc., and our client recently purchased the Oaks of St. George Golf Course. So I'm going to do something I don't normally like to do, which is to start out by apologizing that we're late to the game. I recognize that this process has been going on a long time, and you've put a lot of work into it, but my client has purchased the property and has legitimate interests and concerns, which I hope to outline for you. The next thing I want to say is my client has no interest whatsoever in holding up or prejudicing your position as the county opposite the Empire OMB hearing. Our client's concern is with the southwestern part of St. George and not with the northeastern part. So I wanted to talk, because you're a planning advisory committee, firstly about planning. And I want to begin with the obvious observation that the Oaks property is in your urban boundary. And even more than that, it's in the built boundary, and that's under the growth plan, of course, and therefore it meets the criteria in the provincial policy statement and the growth plan and in your official plan for intensification. And when I read through the material to prepare for tonight, one of the things that struck me is that there is absolutely no planning rationale offered for characterizing my client's property as a secondary settlement area. The only rationale that's offered is one that has to do with servicing. And I respectfully suggest to you that that is the tail wagging the dog. But look, I've been coming down here a lot for the Paris Grand Golf Course case, and I've come to like it, even most of the drive. But I got to tell you, I wouldn't have driven here tonight to tell you things that you already knew or to rehash old arguments that you've heard after all this time of trying to plan for St. George. I came here in person and didn't just send you a letter because we've tried to deliver to you some new information, and the nature of that information, I hope, can be perceived by you as an opportunity rather than anything else. So I guess we have to talk about servicing. So let's start with what I hope are some basic facts. Option 1, which was recommended to you by WSP, which is to go to the Fairchild Creek, as you've just heard, won't even service all of the land that you're planning to designate for growth. And therefore, even at its best, option 1 as a servicing solution only gets you to 2031. Now, you all know, of course, that you're obliged to plan to 2031 for planning purposes. You're not supposed to go beyond then, but what a lot of folks forget is that the provincial policy statement also says there's nothing in it that precludes you planning for servicing beyond that horizon. And the question that I'm inviting you to ask tonight is whether that, in fact, is the better thing to do. My client believes, on the strength of the technical memorandum that I've provided you with tonight from MTE Engineering, that option 2, which is to pipe the effluent over to the Grand, is the only one that makes long-term sense for your community. In my respectful submission to you tonight, a plan to go to Fairchild is a stopgap, and it's an expensive stopgap, and it's one that you need to consider very carefully. And I just want to take a moment, if I could, to ask you to turn up the technical memorandum from MTE, and if you can't find it, I'll tell you very quickly 2 points that it says. It's on page 5 of that document, and it's the last attachment to Ms. McDermott's letter. And what MTE writes is option 1 services a maximum increase in population of 7,990 people. Option 2 has the potential to service future growth beyond the current planning horizon, and ultimately, the costs associated with option 2 can be spread over a larger population and thus funding base in the future. And if you flip over the page to the second last paragraph, they write, option 1 had a greater capital cost as compared to option 2, and you'll see there, that's a difference of about $2 million. Option 1 has a significant higher capital cost for the wastewater treatment plant expansion. And look at those numbers. That's $31 million versus $19 million. That's $12 million, with much of that being attributed to the higher complexity of the treatment train that's going to be required in order for you to get provincial approval to discharge more effluent to the Fairchild Creek. And the letter goes on to say, if option 1 is constructed and the force main to the Grand River is required later to service your future growth, the total cost of option 1, this is your recommended option from your engineering consultant, is $31.6 million plus $10 million. That's $41.6 million, as opposed to the $29 million it would cost you to forget about going to Fairchild and go directly to the Grand. In other words, it's a $12 million difference. And I wanted to make one final observation before concluding, and I'm sorry, I forgot to bring my laser pointer, but if I could just direct your attention up to the proposed land use map, that gigantic blue area, oh, that's so kind of you. Thank you, Mrs. Simon. Do I push the red one? There we go. So this gigantic blue area here, as you'll see over here, is your proposed employment area. But if you go to Fairchild, you can't service that area. And I've been in a lot of municipalities in a lot of places in Ontario, and I've never been anywhere where they weren't most excited about and most concerned about their ability to bring on employment lands. You're locking yourself into dry industrial uses of those lands until at least 2031. So, finally, I have a simple request. I'm asking you to tap the brakes on OPA 16 and on the environmental assessment. I'm asking that you direct staff to meet with us and with your engineering consultants to see if we can contribute to the ongoing discussion about how we solve this problem. I suggest to you that it is in the public interest to ensure that there is a rational and cost-effective long-term servicing solution for St. George, and there is one that is available, and I don't see it reflected in the proposed official plan amendment that's before you tonight. And I know I said that would be the last thing I say, but I do want to say this. Listen, I don't want to get hung up in angels dancing on heads of pins about what down designation means, okay? What I want to tell you is, when my client first purchased this property, we understood that the proposal in OPA 16 was that we were going to be in the primary settlement area. We understand how and why that has changed. My letter, or Ms. McDermott's letter more properly, but I kind of helped her write it, that letter is simply recognizing that we're now facing a situation in which what's proposed is that we're in a secondary settlement area. And I want to be super clear about this. This is not a criticism of Ms. Hassan or anyone else who works for you or anyone who's worked for you in good faith to try to bring us to this point. I have no interest in the past except insofar as it informs decision-making for the future. And this is about the future of St. George, not what has happened thus far. And subject to any questions that you might have of me, that is all I had intended to say.
Any other member of the audience would like to present? Thank you. Please state your name and address when you arrive.
Good evening. I'm Brenda Case from GSP Group, and I represent Riverview Highlands St. George Holdings Limited. I have a short presentation. If not, I'll just put it in here. I'll be extremely short. I'm here to simply tell you about a development that will be coming on stream within the area. If you look at the diagram before you, I've shown you the area that a proposed plan of subdivision will be submitted this week, respecting those lands. We're in partly within the Phase 1B servicing area, and the remaining lands are in the Phase 2 area. Here's the plan of subdivision that's being proposed. It includes 35 single detached dwellings, which are located along the eastern side. This is skewed. North is on the left side. 35 single detached dwellings. We're looking at approximately 29 townhouses. And the large area you see on the right side, which is to the south, the central area there will continue to be natural heritage system. There's no development proposed in that area. And the very bottom section, which is also in the Phase 3 area, is for future development. So we just wanted to let you know that we're proposing to develop in that area. The block 38 and 39, which I identified in the previous slide, is for future development, and that is outside the Phase 1B servicing area. So we're very anxious to proceed. We would need to go, obviously, through a zoning bylaw amendment process, draft plan of subdivision to permit the development, and that's how we plan to proceed. So all we're here to really tell you is that we're coming, we're ready, and that we support the proposed official plan amendment before you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other member of the audience who would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a second time. Is there any other member of the audience who would like to speak to this application? I'll ask a third and final time. Is there any member of the audience who would like to speak to this application? Seeing no one, does the committee wish to deal with this recommendation? Member Coleman moves, seeking a seconder. Seconded by Member Miller. Questions or concerns? Call the vote. Member Gatward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, after hearing the first delegation, I'm concerned about what we're doing here, because the planner has said that we can't service areas 3 and 4. And it does seem like a stopgap what we're doing, and we're doing some on private servicing. As an example, you mentioned the golf course.
Your question is?
Well, I'm inclined to ask for a deferral until staff looks at the proposed solution that the delegation has presented tonight, which would be, in the long run, a more long-term servicing solution for the whole area of St. George. I'm not sure that taking this to 2031 is the right idea. That's not very far away. And so I think we should defer this tonight and have further discussions. So I'm going to make a deferral motion seeking a seconder.
Seconded by Member Simons. Member Pierce, you want to speak to the deferral?
Well, yeah, I do, Mr. Chair, through you, if I could. If we were to, as he stated, tap the brakes, defer this, would one cycle be enough to have those discussions?
Do you want me to?
If you.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, there are some things that I can provide information. With respect to the primary versus secondary, I mean, we completed an area study in 2014. The area study, at that time, we did a lot of technical analysis, and that was the conclusion of the area study in 2014, that St. George cannot be fully serviced. We need to start working on a Class EA, and this is that was the proposed recommendation of the area study that was adopted by council to change the settlement boundary of St. George into primary and secondary. So that was adopted as it was written.
Right.
So this OPA is implementing that area study. Yes, through more information that has been presented through the development application, it has come to our knowledge that, yes, phases 3 and 4 cannot be fully serviced as they are proposed today. Staff already has concerns with the higher densities that have been proposed in various plans. And that's where the exercise comes in amongst the landowners to reduce those densities as they're proposed. So again, as I mentioned, that it is my understanding that the landowners are working on their plans to come to an agreement where they all can develop in accordance with PPS, in accordance with growth plan, also in accordance with our official plan, and also are able to develop fully as it is proposed in the primary, new proposed primary urban settlement boundary of St. George. This whole exercise, it has been reviewed by Ministry of Municipal Affairs. It has been reviewed by the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. They do not have any concerns with the OPA as it is proposed to divide up, St. George in primary and secondary. There are certain, I heard about the comments about the employment lands being on dry industries. It is my understanding that currently we're working on the employment areas in Paris, and that's our prime location, and then shifting focus to Cairnsville and airport. And so in the meantime, 2031 seems a shorter term, but as we are getting closer to reaching at that assimilative capacity of Fairchilds Creek, staff will start looking into what is the step 2. Where does county envision their growth and development? We also heard option 2, which is a better solution. I'm sure that that has been, I mean, we are at the very final stage of Class EA. That option was available. I do not, I apologize, I do not know enough details of the Class EA process itself. But I don't know whether it has been off the table, on the table. I don't know about that. But it is my understanding that that option has been reviewed by staff and the consultants. That information can be presented to the committee prior to council ratification of the recommendation. That what happened, why we are not proceeding with that option 2. We can certainly provide that information prior to next council. I would stress that this, as I stated earlier, that this OPA is very critical to set up that policy framework for the upcoming board hearing, which starts April 9th, April 11th.
Member Pierce, speaking to the amendment, or the deferral, because that's what we've got on the floor right
No,
now.
as I say, I just wanted to understand if we went the deferral, would one cycle be enough? That's all. So I think I kind of got the answer there. Thank you.
Member Cardy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to what Rashika has just said, there needs to be more thought and study put into this number 2 item that you had talked about earlier and the solicitor spoke about. The concern I have is we have run into issues in the recent past with trying to dump affluent into the Grand River, and we've seen what happened to that. I'm concerned about that. I believe staff always looks after our best interest, and I'm looking at that as a leader for me on that, because I don't know a deferral for one cycle is going to do much for us. Thank you.
Member Powell. And you. And then him. Go ahead, Member Powell.
Through you, David Rashika. How far along are we on the employment lands and developing it to hopefully get it going at the same time as the early residential, so we don't just become a bedroom community?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, sorry, are you asking about the employment lands in St. George?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm concerned about that.
Can you answer that, please?
Mr. Trotter is going to answer that. We're not really, the county, we've been pushing Southwest Paris, Canesville, and the airport area. We're not pushing St. George for industrial development this time, Mr. Powell.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, in response to the question from Councillor Powell, these lands are being considered in the employment areas, the land needs analysis that we're doing. Some of the larger policy documents that have to be set up first before we can complete that are information that's coming from the province in terms of their land needs methodology calculations. Those haven't been concluded yet. However, what I can say is that as part of the employment land needs, we will be looking at areas that are both serviced and unserviced, because in fairness to council, you need both. It's good to have both. You can have larger buildings that are logistics buildings, that are warehousing. Warehousing doesn't take a lot of services, doesn't necessarily need a lot of services. To service employment land costs a significant amount of money, and it's good to have areas that are unserviced, because where you do put services in the ground for employment purposes, you want to generate jobs, you want to generate densities, you want to generate those higher order uses within those employment areas. And likewise, you want an option when someone comes in and says, I want to build a warehouse. You can say, well, you can build that warehouse in a St. George location or a Princeton location or other locations that are unserviced. So I don't have a final answer for you on the employment land needs, but what I can say is that we're looking at the employment land needs model and saying you need both. You need a serviced area like down near the Brant Sports Complex, our Brant Business Park, that's going to be fully serviced, and we can intensify with jobs and growth, and we need other areas that are less so. So it's good to have both.
Member Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two quick questions on the deferral motion. First one, if we defer it, does what Brenda Keys from JSP Group, does that delay their application?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we do not have an application from GSP at this time.
Well, she mentioned, said she was going to present it this week.
Yeah.
So if we defer this, would that push that back?
I don't think so.
Okay.
But we are aiming for the Empire Ontario Municipal Board hearing.
Okay. Second question too. We one of the things we're talking about is the NIF and discharge in there. And my understanding is the Class EA is not done. They're still doing it. And one of the options that I seen was the grant. So is that information out there that we already have an option then?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we can find out what the exact answer to that question is.
I'm prepared to wait.
Option 1 and 2, and present it prior to the council meeting.
I'm prepared to wait till SEMA's done their work. Like I say, it seems to me that we've prejudged what the outcome is, and I don't know if that's the case.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, my understanding is all options through Class EA have been looked at, have been reviewed, and have been vetted through by the ministry, and I'm sure that we can find that answer for you.
Member Simons.
My question has been answered, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Any other member of committee with a question? Member Obama?
Not so much a question as a comment through you. I understand the concerns raised, and at the same time, at the end of the day, I believe it's more critical that we put our policy structure in place in order to phase the development properly. Even given that we know we have other work to do, we know from other applications in other areas that there are opportunities for micro-servicing and many other things. So I cannot accept that we have to build a big pipe to dump our effluent into the Grand River. And I think there are better options that will come online over the next decade or two. And in fact, if you recall when the GRCA made their budget presentation, I asked that question, how does the GRCA plan on handling 500,000 people moving into the watershed by 2051? And the biggest issue that they have to deal with is sewage, honestly. And we cannot long-term continue to count on our water courses in order to indefinitely provide us with effluent capacity. Therefore, I think knowing from our staff and the professionals that we have hired to do this, that the pipe to the Grand River is probably not a good choice because it must have come up also. I don't see the point in deferring this any longer. We need the policy structure in place in preparation for the OMB hearing. And while I would like to see enough servicing in order to handle all of our built boundaries as primary urban settlement areas long-term, I do believe that will happen. But at this point, this is the best that we can do and we need to move forward. So I will be voting against the deferral and I will be voting to pass this as presented this evening. My comments. Thank you.
Anyone else? Seeing none? I don't like to do this as chair. I don't like to comment on things, but I'm going to tonight. I will not support a deferral. Staff have been working on this for God knows how long. Excuse my language. Sorry. We've got something before us right now that they've been working on for an awful long time. If you read the report, you will find letters from all the developers in here who are in support of this. So I will not be supporting a deferral. I'm going to call the vote on the deferral. If it passes, well, it passes. But if it fails, then I will speak to the report. We have a mover and a seconder on the deferral. All those in favor? I'm counting 2. Opposed? 7. Motion is defeated. Seeking committee, how would you wish to deal with the recommendation before you? It's already before us. Member Coleman, the seconder? We have a seconder. I'm going to call the vote on the recommendation. All those, recorded vote. All those in favor, please stand. Opposed? This motion is carried. It will go forward to council for final approval 3 weeks from this evening. Thank you, Rajika, on a terrific job. Moving on to consent items. There are no consent items to be approved. There are 2 consent items to be received. Seeking a motion moved by Member Baumann to receive, second by Member Pierce. Any questions or concerns on those consent items? Seeing none, all those in favor to receive? Opposed? They are received. Committee reports, there are none listed. Staff reports, there are 3. Point out to you that D has been deferred in the staff reports. How do you wish to deal with the 3? Do you want to separate them or all at once, Member Coleman?
Maybe we should separate.
Do you want to separate them? They're going to be separated, so we'll deal with 11A first. It's moved by Member Coleman, second by Member Cardy. Member Gatward, do you have a question?
No, I was seconding.
Seconding? Okay, I'm sorry, I picked Mr. Cardy first. All those in favor? Opposed? Is approved. D, this Peninsula OMB hearing. Seeking a mover, moved by Member Bama. Seeking a seconder. Member Simons? Any questions or concerns? All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. C, Building Division Stats, presented by Brandon Hassan. Moved by Member Pierce, seeking a seconder, Member Coleman. Questions or concerns about it? Seeing none, call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Communications. We have a letter here, and I will get to it. You probably have it already in front of you. I don't. How do you wish to deal with this letter? Member Miller? Receive his information. Seeking a seconder. Member Cardy seconds. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. There's no other business listed. General Manager's update.
Sure, I've got 3 things I'd like to talk about. I'm not certain if you've already gotten them. You might be getting them at CDC meeting. It's our building stats. And I just wanted to point out that it's, in general, we're about double what we were last year. Activity has already started to pick up in ICI and residential, and we haven't even gotten into building permit review for some of the subdivisions that are going to be coming on stream on Paris, on Rest Acres Road in the north end. So we're expecting it to be quite busy. Also wanted to advise that the lock grading technologist position advertisement is closed. We've had some people who've applied for it, approximately 20 applications. And we're just sorting through those right now for interviewing, and we'll keep you up to date on how we do. And the other thing I wanted to advise council, or sorry, Planning Advisory Committee, is at the next CDC meeting, we're going to be having a report brought forward from the Building Division requesting approval to fill 2 positions, 2 new positions, which are going to be plans examiners for the Building Division. They will be fully funded through the building permit fee process, or building permit process fees and applications. This is something that is consistent with the staffing review report that was done by Performance Concepts. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Any member of committee with a question of Mr. Pomponi? Member Gatward, and then Member Miller.
Thank you. When does the review or the position for the development engineering reviewer close?
I believe the one that's just been, I think it's, I'm going by memory, I think it's March 11th, but I could be wrong.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
I believe it's March 11th. I'm going by memory.
So very soon, we may have somebody by the end of the month?
sorry, the development engineering reviewer, which is a position that was just currently somebody just resigned from? Or are you talking about the lot grading technologist one? Sorry.
Thank you.
Okay.
Member Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick question through to Mark. One of the OMB hearings has to do with the Nith Peninsula area study. What's going on with that?
I'm not sure. I could ask Rob Trotter to maybe update you on the Nith Peninsula area study. Top of my head, I'm not sure, so.
They appealed so they could be under the OMB system instead of the LPAT system.
Okay, that means nothing to me.
Well, that's your answer.
In the item you just received for communications, that's the document from the province creating the LPAT, help me out, Land Local Planning Review Tribunal. Planning Application Tribunal. Anyway, it replaces the OMB. So they wanted to appeal so that they would be under the OMB system. As that's the nature of that appeal.
But the follow-up then,
it's the subdivision. It's not
but the Nith Peninsula area study, was that not started at one time?
Pardon me?
The Nith Peninsula area study, was that not started at one time?
Oh, yes, it has not been completed. That's correct.
Do we have a timeline for that? That's what.
We've asked the applicant, which is Losani, to complete that prior to the subdivision, which they have to do. They've indicated that they're willing to do that. The timing, Ruchika, in the next, do you recall? Yeah, I think there's still some technical information related to the area study that's still outstanding. But our goal is to bring it forward as soon as we can. But of course, now that it's been appealed, it'll be the subdivision will be before the board.
Any other questions of Mr. Pomponi? Seeing none? Thank you, Rob. Mark and Rob. Moving on, I need a motion to go in camera. Moved by Member Pierce, second by Member Baumann. All those in favor? I'm going to give you a 2-minute recess.